Holy hell, this guy was super irritating back in 2010 upon his release for the majority of the player base, not everybody, but most people. I'm of course talking about the guy, RuneScape 3's poster child, Nomad. I can already kind of see people, a few people calling me out for the title, I beat him first try, or maybe a few people beat him after Evolution of Combat. This is specifically Nomad in January of 2010 and how horrible and annoying he was for the time, especially for a quest boss. But I do get that this is all subjective and there are going to be a few disagreements, but let me just lay out a little bit of context for you guys. Sure, there are many quest bosses in the modern day. I don't know about RS3, but old school does have quite a bit now, ever since about 2018, I would say. You have Vanstrom Claus, whatever the hell, from Sins of the Father. You have probably all the Desert Treasure 2 bosses minus Duke, because he's kind of a pushover. Some people have trouble with the Fragment of Seren if they're new. Let's see here, what else do we have? We have Galvek from Dragon Slayer 2. In my opinion, none of these compare to 2010 Nomad. At the time all of those quest bosses I just listed were released, the game had already progressed a lot. For example, most of the harder quest bosses on old school RuneScape came out after 2018, I would say. By 2018, we already had the Inferno, 2 raids, and some other decently challenging solo content outside of quests. To summarize, players were used to challenging content being in the game. Now you compare that to January 2010 when Nomad hit the scene, permanently dabbing on everyone with his bald ass head, and you have this list of heavy hitters. KBD, KQ, Barrows, Jad, Dagonoth Kings, Chaos Elemental, ooh, here's a tough one right here, the Giant Mole, God Wars, and the Corporeal Beast. So based on that list, we can determine that as of January 2010, Court Beast was the hardest boss in the game at that point. But that ultimately didn't matter because most people that did Corp would do so in a group of like 15, 20 people and just kick the hell out of it. So the hardest solo content challenge was still Jad and the Fire Cape, which was released all the way back in 2005 at this point. The player base in 2010 compared to the player base now was lacking in skill, if you want to put it that way. For the most part, there weren't many sweaty players and there wasn't much reason to be sweaty. The community mostly gravitated toward minigames, skilling, and other social aspects of the game at the time, not brushing up on PvM skills. While the average player's PvM skill in 2010 may have been lacking, they had access to a few key things that would help them in the fight and overall made PvM much easier. The first thing was summoning and the Beast of Burden category of summoning familiars. They basically allowed players to carry extra things in their inventory, well, outside of their inventory. You can think of it as like an inventory expansion. So in old school you only have 28 spaces, that's it. That's all you get. That's not the case here. The Thorny Snail at 13 summoning held 3 extra slots for 31 total. The Spirit Calphite at 25 summoning held 6 extra slots for 34 total. The Bull Ant at 40 summoning held 9 extra slots for 37 total. The Spirit Terrorbird at 52 summoning held 12 extra slots for 40 total. The War Tortoise at 67 summoning held 18 extra slots for 46 total. And finally, the Pack Yak at 96 summoning held 30 extra slots for 58 total. The second key thing that players in 2010 had were overloads and extreme potions. Overloads in 2010 were similar to the best overloads in modern day Chambers of Xeric on old school, only better in terms of melee and range boosts. Extreme potions were just souped up super potions. Lastly, players had access to the Ancient Curses prayer book, which allowed prayers such as Soul Split, which allowed you to heal 10% of your damage dealt, and things like Turmoil, which was just a better version of Piety. I'm rambling about all these extra factors because I believe it lends credence to how annoying Nomad was at the time. Even with all these extra advantages, if you want to call them that, people still had some issues with Nomad. Granted, if you had 2 out of 3 of these things, or all 3, you were much less likely to struggle with them, but still. So what do we have? We have the wider part of the RuneScape community not prepared for a difficult solo challenge, and arguably the hardest quest boss in the game set to drop on January 12, 2010.
Oh boy, a new Grandmaster quest. Cool, it probably has a sick reward, let's do it. And it's medium length, this will be easy.
All types of players began doing the quest. You had your PVMers, skillers, and quest cape nerds just trying to get their cape back. A few unique puzzles, nice, kill this thing, stop it from munching on roots. Another puzzle, some barrels, blow those up, and finally a doorway. Behind this doorway, blocking the player from getting their quest cape back, was the hardest solo boss in the game at the time, and he was revving up the spanking machine. Sitting at level 699, Nomad was the highest level quest boss at the time and third in the entire game behind the corporeal beast and Jad himself. Nomad had a number of interesting abilities. Typeless attacks that were comparable in damage and annoyance to the Calphite Queen's needle spam, a charge-up attack that would automatically hit a player for their maximum health -1, so if your HP was 99 you'd be eating a 98. Don't even think about venging it either because that didn't work. Recoils also didn't work. He had an attack that would hit a 75 if you didn't hide behind a pillar on time, flame mines that he would throw out onto the ground that automatically hit 40 damage when walked over, a freaking Naruto clone move, then you had like 4 bald dudes kicking the shit out of you. Nomad also had a whopping 1000 HP, and the first time he reaches 25% HP he gets a full heal, prolonging the annoying fight. Did I just say a full heal? I meant he heals back to half HP, not full, but still. You get him down to 25% health again and he goes sicko mode with his staff and starts smacking you just about every second. Taking all of these things into account alongside a player base that wasn't too experienced with solo PvM, and the initial feedback was to be expected.
Trust me when I say it is. Nomad is next to impossible to beat without either luck or really high combat stats. There goes my dream of a quest cape.
Wow, I guess I successfully predicted the future. No more easy quests. Goodbye, quest cape.
I was going to try until I heard 130s were being destroyed by him.
I hated every fudge in 19 tries and am not near maxed.
I'm 120 and I failed at Nomad for 16 times. He's harder than ever. Well, there goes my lovely quest cape into the bank.
I just owned the boss after dying 20 times.
This dude makes Jad look like a pet dog.
I read multiple comments from 2010 stating they used 20 plus brews. Imagine that, a boss that uses 20 plus brews in a single fight. It's unheard of nowadays, it's ridiculous. Speaking of brews, this boss single-handedly doubled the price of brews, and that's no exaggeration. Take a look at this graph right here from January 2010 until about February 2010. From just under 3K for a 4-dose Sarah brew to right around 6K for nearly a month after Nomad's release as people started to figure out how to tackle him. Some individuals on forums claim that brews tripled or quadrupled in price, but the graph only tracks Grand Exchange prices and not street or forum prices at the time. I couldn't manage to get into an archived version of the marketplace forums from January 2010 to confirm or deny that, but with how many attempts were happening, it wouldn't be unusual. Players looking for a cheese method opted to use the Spirit Kayat familiar, something that was accessible to a good number of players, only requiring 57 summoning. It had a special move that could deal massive damage very quickly, allowing some players to complete the quest when they otherwise would not have been able to. Other completions were by skilled players or people that got lucky with some ruby bolts. When Woox finds it necessary to upload a video on a boss, it's typically due to it being called difficult by the majority of the community. A vocal minority wanted Nomad nerfed immediately, while others argued he was fine, and that he brought back a certain level of prestige to the quest cape. Well, Nomad didn't get directly nerfed around this time, and for a short while Nomad did in fact bring back a slight amount of prestige to an otherwise simple cape to get. After the introduction of Evolution of Combat, a good deal of older boss fights were left by the wayside for a time, becoming much easier due to the higher DPS outputs from the new style of combat and the action bar. Nomad was one of these bosses, but there was a time throughout 2010 where he was truly a pain in the ass. In the years following, a statue of Nomad was made to commemorate his 2010 release, marking just how iconic he was to the game back then. Even in modern RuneScape discussion, people still discuss just how annoying this boss fight truly was. That's about all I have for you guys. Thank you so much for watching this far. I'm sorry for the short length of the video, but I didn't want to stretch it out any further, and I figured I'd do this video this week because I had jury duty that kind of wrecked my whole week, so I was going to do a longer one, but I chose this one. Let me know what you thought of Nomad down below. RuneScape Historian, out.